This is Chris with Phoenix Gaming, and you're listening to Live, Laugh, Wah at Orc Secondaries in Nephilim. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over all the secondary objectives for Nephilim with the Orc faction. We're going to look at each category individually and rank them best to worst per category. Obviously, to me, best being the most reliable or easiest to score, worst being the least or hardest to score. We're not focusing on who can cap what. We're actually just going to look at which ones you can consistently score. If you can consistently get between 8 to 12 points out of a secondary, I think you're doing all right. You know, we're not all out here going to tournaments trying to top table everything, and we need to keep that into perspective. You know, you just got to focus on beating your opponent first. You know, if you're the type of person that needs to score max points, that's fine. I'm not taking away from that. I'm just saying most players really just need to look at the secondaries and see which ones that they can score reliably and how to kind of build their list around it. After all of that, we're going to do a little like top 5. And obviously, this is just my opinion, so it's kind of based off of my play style and how I tend to be. You might have a different experience with your army, and that's fine. I'd love to hear about it in the comments section. Then now we're going to just take off. We're going to start with Purge the Enemy. I think this is probably the worst category for Orcs. There's a lot of very situational or opponent list dependent builds here. You know, obviously the Orc secondary, the biggest and the best. You get 2 points for if your Warlord inflicts damage on an enemy vehicle or monster, 5 or more models. 5 or more models destroyed as a result of attacks made by your Warlord this round. An enemy unit is destroyed this round. Warlord is within range of an objective, not in a deployment zone, and it caps at 5 per battle round. So interestingly, I had a talk with another war boss that I know named John, and he thinks this is a solid one. I didn't think it was that solid, but he pointed something out to me that I never really thought about, and that's why this got put into first. And that's that you can just put your warlord on an objective not in the deployment zone, and if you can keep him there for 4 turns, you got 8 points. So that means like if you build a really tanky mega armor war boss, like you give him Arta's nails and super cyborg body, you know, you could slap him on an objective and he's going to be really hard to shift. And again, based on how I play, that would work because I would probably run Death Skulls. I would probably give him OBSEC and then just plop him on the objective and then maybe try to surround him with some Mega Knobs or something else just to keep him screened and try to score some points. And then if he does some extra damage or kills a unit, you know, we can get a couple extra points in there. So I think you can reliably get 8 out of that. You might be able to get 10 depending on your mission and other things. Assassinate and bring it down. I think these are, you know, again, and these are situational for everybody. You know, it's really dependent on what your opponent's bringing. I think more opponents are going to have. I do think you're going to see enough either vehicles or characters to justify taking one of these in most games. And you're going to get 9 to 10 points reliably. But again, it's super situational. If you're playing against somebody who doesn't have much of either, cool. Like, I try not to take secondaries that are tailored around my opponent. I try to have secondaries that I can score first. And then if they have one, then I can kind of jump to it. So like I could take the biggest and the best, but if you're bringing 6 characters, I might take Assassinate instead. But biggest and the best is going to be my first priority because that's based off of things that I'm doing instead of things that you're doing. We're going to move on from there to No Mercy, No Respite. And again, this is another category that's very situational for Orcs. It's entirely too dependent on your opponent's lists. You've got Grind, which is the old attrition. And then you've got the Orc secondary, Stomp 'em Good. And they're basically variations of the same objectives. To me, the Orc one, it's specifically in the fight phase, and you get, I don't remember the point scoring, but you get some points for killing something, and you get like an extra point if you kill double what your opponent killed. My issue with that is Orcs really lack the staying power to reliably kill more in any phase, you know? So it's one of those where I don't think it's one you take, and if you do, you have to really build into it. Like, you have to know what you're doing. No Prisoners is obviously opponent dependent. And again, I would probably take no prisoners before I took grind and stomp, even if I could only get 6 points and no prisoners, because I'm just not confident in my ability to kill more in most melee phases or just in most turns. So Warpcraft, this one's interesting because there are some things you can do here. You know, if you don't bring a weird boy or a were boy, abhor the witch, which is extremely dependent. And I know I'm going out of order, and I apologize for that. Abhor the witch is extremely dependent on your opponent's list, but you forfeit the ability to take that. So, like if you're at a tournament and you hit Grey Knights, you don't get to take abhor the witch if you got a weird boy or a were boy. But again, that's probably not a matchup you're going to see a ton of. So to me, I think the best one is Psychic Interrogation. It actually got easier in Nachmund. It didn't change. You do have to take a Weird Boy. Weird Boys are a weird spot right now because they're not good. They got a good solid nerf coming from 8th to 9th. They're still usable. They still have function. They're just a lot less reliable. But you know, Psychic Interrogation goes off on, I think it's a 4. You have to be within 24 inches of an enemy character, and you get 3 points every time you do it. Too easy. It's one of those where even if you did it for 3 turns, you're getting 9 points, and that still gives you 2 turns to jump or jabbing fingers or what's the other one? Gives you a bonus attack. Can't think of it. Warp Ritual, I think, is harder to do consistently, and if there's no objective in the middle of the board, you're just kind of throwing points in your army at the center of the board to sit there and not hold an objective. So if it has a center objective, it might be worth taking. You do have to hold that middle pretty consistently. Like you're gonna be fighting over the middle. You could probably use it creatively to try to bait your opponent into the middle. You'd be forfeiting some of your primary or your secondary points in order to use that as bait, but you could help kind of dictate where your opponent goes and kind of try to use that to create or change the course of the battle. So it's one of those where you, if you're clever, if you're cunning but brutal, you could probably use that one to pretty good effect. I tend to be a little bit more brutal but cunning, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's both. Battlefield Supremacy. So this is going to have a couple of your auto takes. You know, I think Green Tide is an auto take, especially now that you get a 5-up invuln once per game and a 6-up invuln once per game. You know, so you can consistently get that with like 10 points a game. Because the Green Tide is basically you get, what is it? I think it's 1 point for every quarter you have at least 10 models in. So that one got easier. It used to be you had to have a unit with 10 or more models. Now it's you just have to have 10 or more total models. So turn 1, you're going to get 2 points. Unless you like totally screw something up. You could arguably get 3 or 4 points, but you do have to be 6 inches inside your opponent's quarters. So like you can't just squeak right on the other side. You have to be wholly within the quarter, 6 inches out of any other quarter. So you can't just kind of tap in and grab it, but you can to jump, or if you go first and get lucky and you got a big blob or 2 of commandos, you can kind of use those to get you some points. So there's some ways to kind of get points there. And like I said, like you can get 10 points in that one if you're smart and clever. I think behind enemy lines, and then engage in all fronts. The reason I put engage in all fronts last is because it's basically like a weird side grade from Green Tide. You know, you'll only get 2 points for 3 quarters, 3 points for 4 quarters, but you don't have to have 10 or more models in the quarter. You know, you can have a single vehicle in it to control it, stuff like that. So it's like, it's easier to get, but the ceiling is lower, if that makes sense. You know, you're not going to get 4 points in a turn from it. You're only ever going to get at most 3. And you're not scoring that one turn 1 for the most part. Again, unless you've got, what do you call it? Some commandos or something that don't get beat down turn 1. Behind enemy lines, I mean, that one's pretty good because you can use Storm Boys and Coptas. They deep strike inherently, so you can kind of plop them in turn 2 and turn 3. And if you can get a unit of each in each turn, you can just have 8 points in those 2 turns. Coptas have kind of a small footprint, even though they've got a big base, because you can just take a 3-man unit of them. Storm Boys, you can take a 5-man. So it's one of those where Coptas are really utility and Storm Boys are really utility. Your Shadow Ops are a lot of your action-based secondaries, obviously. There's some really good options in there. You do have to kind of build around them, and that's fine. I think Get the Good Bits. I haven't gotten to use this one yet, but I know it got easier because Gretchen and Ludas get to do it, and the action ends at the end of the turn instead of your next command phase. So Gretchen going down a point, Gretchen getting access to the once per game invuln from your WA, and then Gretchen being able to get the good bits at the end of the turn instead of the next command phase gives them some utility that they didn't have before. And that's why I put this one first. I haven't gotten to use it, but I think the changes are really good, and I used it to some success in Nachmund. I usually got about 8 to 10 points in there. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I always scored decently with it. But again, I had to kind of position and work for it. I think Nachmund Data is a close second. I think the big difference between them is that Nachmund Data caps at 12, but it's really easy to get 8 points. If you've got Storm Boys and the jump or commandos, like you can get your 8 points because you can turn 1 do 1 quarter, turn 2 do one of your quarters, turn 3 do an enemy's quarter, or even turn 2 do an enemy's quarter. Or if you've got commandos and you go first, you can turn 1 do an enemy's quarter. So there's a lot of ways to kind of build your list to be able to kind of do Nachmund Data pretty consistently. The only downside is that unless you're taking 6-man units, you're going to fail on a 6. Banners. Okay, so banners did change and it got better. I do think banners is kind of a bad choice for most orc armies because I think orcs are an army. They're not mobile. They're deceptively mobile, like they have to move every turn. They can't just sit and camp for the most part. Like there's a couple units that you can camp with, but for the most part, they have to keep moving, keep getting into combat. If they're sitting on an objective and they're not doing anything, they're probably going to die. And that's just kind of my take on it. So they need to be moving. They don't camp well, and they need to be charging. You would need like a couple units of Gretchen to just kind of do your banners with. They don't have a lot of access to like action and shoot or anything like that, so you got to be careful with that type of stuff. But that's how I think it is. So that's how I think each category stacks up. We're going to look at my top 5 picks, and I actually just talked to old War Boss John about this as well. He and I disagree on this one, and I understand why. And that's fine. But my top 5 are going to be Green Tide because of the way I play. I like bringing boys. I like bringing the beast snaggers. I like bringing infantry. I do like having the trucks and the battle wagons also. Like I tend to take a little bit of everything. I don't tend to spam much. I don't enjoy spamming. But Green Tide, the biggest and the best, get the good bits, Nachmund Data, engage on all fronts. And a lot of these are actually just kind of like interchangeable. Like what I say, Green Tide and Engage. I would take Green Tide before I took Engage, but Engage is there if you're not playing with a lot of boys and you're playing with a lot of buggies. So it's one of those where you just kind of swap those out based on the way you would build your list. But based on the way I play, this is how I would probably rate them or rank them. And again, if you're one of those that wants your buggies and your vehicles, I think you just take the non-orc based secondaries and flip them into, so like Engage for Green Tide, maybe Nachmund for get the good bits, that type of thing. So that's my take on how orcs can score some consistent points in Nephilim. If you've got any questions or comments, or if you disagree and you want to have a discussion, leave it in the comments section. We are going to be updating our Patreon tiers here. The hatchling is going to be $1.50. You're going to get a mention on the patrons page. I'm going to add a patron slide to every video, and we're going to give a shout out to all the patrons. And then we're going to have the Firebird, which will give you 24-hour early access to all content and an ability to vote on future content. And then we're going to have an Immortal, which will give you obviously everything above. And then we'll send you a Phoenix Gaming shirt directly to you. We'll reach out to you. We'll get your shipping address, and I'll send it out to you. And we'll do a special shout out for all the Immortals at the end of the video. So that's what we're looking at for that. And then, as usual, thank you for watching. Patreon.com/Phoenix Gaming Space. Twitter @2NerdsChris. You can find us at Facebook.com/Phoenix Gaming Knox. And then PhoenixGaming.space is our website. And then we have a Teespring store. It is actually the old Vorpal Gaming store. And all these links are going to be in the description as well. But the Teespring is vorpal-gaming.creator-spring.com. And you can get your own Phoenix Gaming shirt. You can get some of my 40K themed t-shirts that I've got there, and some sweatshirts and other swag. So again, thank you for listening. I appreciate you.